who will all speak for about 10 minutes before we take questions at the end. And they are Callum Coleman, Public Affairs Coordinator at Living Streets, Caroline Strickland, Chief Executive Officer at Transport for All, Kate Dickens, Senior Policy Officer at Sustrans, and Hannah Trussler, Public Affairs and Campaigns Manager at Guide Dogs. Please post any questions you have in the Q&A box, not the chat box. And we're going to start with Callum from Living Streets. Callum, you've got 10 minutes. Sorry, Callum, you've got 10 minutes. Caroline. Did I say Callum? It says Callum here. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. My apologies. We're going to start with Caroline Strickland, CEO at Transport for All.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone in the room online. My name is Caroline Strickland. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman with longer than shoulder length brown hair, wearing an oatmeal coloured jumper to protect from the warmth. So I'm the Chief Executive of Transport for All. If you've not heard of us before, we are the disabled people's organisation focused on access to transport. That's private transport, public transport and street space for the 14.6 million disabled people who live across the UK. And today, I really welcome the opportunity to join the All-Party Parliamentary Group to be a part of this conversation and to really keep highlighting the issue of pavement parking and the barriers it can pose for disabled people. But I would really encourage us to take this opportunity as a way to shine a light on the issue, but also to drive some action. I think we've been talking about this issue for a long time, and it's really important to our community and many others that we see action as well as the discussion today. So today I wanted to touch upon why pavement parking is a barrier to travel for disabled people, the impacts that it has, and then also touch a little bit on the consultation process so far and how we can maybe move forward. So just to set the scene, so the first thing I want to talk about is the transport accessibility gap. And that's the fact that disabled people make 38% fewer journeys than non-disabled people every year. So if we were making all the journeys that we wanted to, we'd make around 50% more. That's a significant proportion. But the journeys that we do make do not go without a hitch. We face a range of barriers to travel, whether that's financial barriers like extra costs, whether it's information barriers about being able to find the information we need to plan and make a journey, or whether it's infrastructure barriers like pavement parking and our footways being blocked. And this has a significant knock-on effect on us as a community. We're more likely to be living in poverty, we're more likely to be out of work, we're less likely to complete education. Because access to transport impacts on everything else that we want to do. So whether it's getting to school, getting to the office, or simply going to the pub or the community centre, whatever it is that's important for us as individuals relies on transport, relies on being able to walk up and down our local streets. And the government's recognised this. So in the Inclusive Transport Strategy in 2018, the government set an ambition of creating a transport system and offering equal transport access to disabled people by 2030. So I think in the fact that that vision and that aim is now only 7 years away, we are really concerned at Transport for All that we've had this 3 years of stasis where we should have been making that progress towards removing barriers caused by pavement parking. So just before I move on, I wanted to touch briefly on something called the social model of disability. And that's something we use at Transport for All, and it's come out of our community, it's come out of disabled people ourselves. And it's a way that we explain how we are disabled. So if you think about the way that pavement parking can impact on disabled people, it can make it hard for a wheelchair user to pass along the pavement, meaning we have to go out into the street. It can cause barriers for blind and visually impaired people, whether they're travelling with assistance dogs or other mobility aids. And it can impact on parents with buggies. And just as a side note, remember that some disabled people are parents too. And older people, people with luggage. So many of us face a barrier caused by pavement parking. But the reason I wanted us to take a social model approach to this discussion is to really underline that we are not the problem here. Disabled people are not the problem, people that need to change our behaviours because of this issue. The problem under the social model says that if we're facing barriers to getting around, then the people who hold power, whether that's governments, local authorities, people who control parking licenses, they are the people that need to take action. They're the people that have the power to remove those barriers. And when we think about all the different barriers that do exist to transport, and I touched on a few a moment ago, some of them are really thorny. They're going to take time, investment, collaboration. So getting step-free access to all of London's tubes. It's going to take time. We're going to need lifts. We're going to need big old tunnels and boring machines and all this stuff. That's going to take a while. It's a really big, meaty problem. When we think about pavement parking, I don't want to simplify the issue, but it's an issue with public support. It's an issue where we have strong consensus. It's an issue where in London and some regions we already have seen this action. So to me, it strikes me as one of the barriers that we could be acting, we could be taking steps on today to try and remove that barrier. So what's the impact? I'm just going to touch on this from a sort of top level perspective because we'll hear more from colleagues later this afternoon talking to their individual experiences. But it's a barrier because almost all journeys for any of us, disabled or non-disabled, will likely begin with some amount of walking or wheeling, even if we're just going to the vehicle or the stop or the station. And so it's a really crucial mode of transport, and we need to do everything we can to remove those barriers to walking and wheeling. Yet despite this, the Department for Transport tells us that disabled people take 30% fewer walking and wheeling trips every year than non-disabled people. And we also see investment and infrastructure upgrades on other modes, whether that's access for all funding on rail or improvement in bus infrastructure. But actually getting to use that infrastructure needs us to walk to the end of the street. So we need to be thinking about this in a kind of joined up way. And in order to sort of just share with you the impact that this has on our community, I've got a couple of quotes here I wanted to read out from members of Transport for All. So one person said, "This isn't just a minor inconvenience or eyesore in the same way it might be to non-disabled people. It stops me from being able to live my life, from getting to work, to the shops, to see my friends, to medical appointments and more." And someone else said, "As a wheelchair user, sometimes I have no option but to turn back the way I came. In order to cross the street, I need to move around and find a dropped curb or a crossing. So if a car is parked across one, or if there isn't one nearby, I'll have to travel for ages to the nearest one. This isn't just frustrating, it's exhausting, and it adds a lot of time to my journey. For me, pavement parking means more abandoned journeys, more time and energy wasted, and a more dangerous crossing experience. Ultimately, it makes my neighbourhood less accessible to me, and it stops me living with the freedom and independence that non-disabled people have." So just a flavour there of some of our community members at Transport for All who've shared their experiences on this. And the last point I wanted to make is just to touch on the fact that this affects so many people across the disabled community. I've shared some stories there from wheelchair users, but it also has an impact on people who are neurodivergent or people who might have learning disabilities or cognitive impairments, because it can make the street really complicated and confusing. If it's not clear where's safe to pass, where's safe to cross, then we're really creating barriers that don't need to be there. So just to look ahead, we are really, really keen to see government action in terms of a response to the consultation, and then also, as I said earlier, action. We are living in a world where we want to see more disabled people interacting with decision making, being a part of local communities, of local community decision making. So if we're going to ask people what their opinions are through a consultation, we need to then act on what's heard. And just as an aside, we have seen a summer of encouraging the government to act in alignment with the guiding principles of good consultation, whether that's running kind of ticket office consultations that may or may not be fully accessible or fully directly transparent about what proposals may or may not include. And one of the guiding principles of good consultation is that conscientious consideration must be given to consultation responses before a decision is made. However, I think I'll just end in saying that I think 3 years is probably long enough to give something conscientious consultation. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Caroline, not Callum. I thank you also for sticking to time, because it means we've got more time for questions at the end if everybody sticks to time. So I'm assuming that Callum will be next. Yeah. Thank you. It was the wrong way around here. So our next speaker is Callum Coleman, the Public Affairs Coordinator at Living Streets, who's going to take the hot seat. Thank you. Callum, you have 10 minutes.
Like mastermind, isn't it? So, do you have slides?
Yeah, they come in.
They're coming. They're quite basic. I'll start off by saying I'm covering for a colleague, so apologies if I'm relatively reliant on notes. But I'm essentially here to just give a quick overview of where we're at now. So what does the policy landscape on pavement parking look like at the moment? Can you do the next slide? So just to very briefly reiterate the problem. In sort of Living Streets research, we commissioned YouGov to do some polling a couple of years ago, and we found that 87% of parents have had to walk into the road because of pavement parking. We also found that 80% of parents would be more likely to walk their children to school if there wasn't pavement parking on that route. And then a freedom of information request that we made in 2019 found that 93% of local authorities in England have received complaints about pavement parking. So this is something with quite broad reach and that is quite significantly impacting the decisions people make about the way that they travel. Could I get the next slide, please, Adam? So I wanted to make the point that 3 years is quite a long time to wait for a consultation. So I did the obvious thing and got an AI to generate an image of Joe Biden and Gordon Brown at the Eiffel Tower. You might be wondering why. That's because today marks 1,114 days since the consultation closed on the 22nd of November 2020. At that point, we're currently seeing discussion about Joe Biden and whether he's going to run for a second term. He was 2 weeks into his first term at that point. If you'd started building the Eiffel Tower the day the consultation closed, you'd have finished it on 27th of January this year. And if Gordon Brown had become Prime Minister on the day the consultation closed, David Cameron would have taken over a couple of months ago. So it's quite a long period of time to sit on a consultation response. So yeah, that's the picture in England is delays. So the current options that are available to local authorities, essentially that driving on the footways is already illegal in England. But the only civil enforcement that is available is the costly use of traffic regulation orders on a street by street or area by area basis. While that can be effective in some places, it leads to quite a patchwork approach. So what we need is kind of legal consistency. So the consultation that we'll probably all refer to, the Managing Pavement Parking consultation, tabled 3 options. So simplifying TROs, which are essentially the work to digitize the process, which is already being undertaken. Decriminalizing causing an unnecessary obstruction, which is what was adopted by Wales, and banning pavement parking with a national legislative approach, which is what's been adopted in Scotland. Worth pointing out as well that the transport bill has been delayed for the foreseeable future. So it's not looking likely that we'll get any action on this anytime soon. To quickly cover London, so the rules are different in London as of the Greater London Councils Act 1974. Pavement parking is managed in London separately. It's not allowed in London unless there are signs and lines to say that people can. Overall, it works quite well. It's very good in the inner boroughs. The level of enforcement is the main caveat. So where people know that it's unlikely to be enforced, you still do see quite rampant pavement parking. And then the boroughs that have sort of eased the rules off and allow broad exemptions, so Richmond, Harrow, Lewisham especially, we see that pavement parking is really quite bad in those, and we get through a lot of photos from local groups in Lewisham especially, showing those kind of quite streets just full of cars parked on the pavement. So some councils are better at enforcement than others. Could I get the next slide? It's a shame to see that go. So in Wales, the Welsh government established the Wales Pavement Parking Task Force in 2019 and consulted on its recommendations, which were essentially to decriminalise unnecessary obstruction on the pavement. This was within the Welsh government's devolved powers, but a new proposal was required for a second consultation, which was promised this year. And we're expecting new regulations by the end of the year. In a written statement in April, Lee Waters said that this would now be delayed until 2024 to allow for the implementation of the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. So yeah, delays are sort of the picture almost everywhere. Sorry, next slide. So in Scotland, as of next week, so as of the 11th of December, there is going to be a nationwide ban on pavement parking. All right. Drivers in Scotland can be fined £100 for parking on the footway. This was introduced in the 2019 Act, the Transport Act, which banned pavement parking. Local authorities can make an exemption order for footways in their areas. So I think this is a universal thing that all of our organisations would put forward, that this wouldn't just be a blanket ban on pavement parking everywhere. I know that I grew up on a terrace street in Crewe, and there's absolutely no chance that you could have had blanket ban on pavement parking on that street. So I think everybody is pushing for it to be a sensibly enforced ban, but we need that ban for the clarity on the rules and so that this can actually progress. There are some concerns that there'll be mass exemptions in Scotland, that local authorities will sort of abuse that power to exempt streets in their area. My Scottish colleagues put out a sort of quote last week about how this would actually conflict with obligations under the Equalities Act to protect older and disabled people. So that's an important thing that my colleagues in Scotland will keep an eye on. Yeah, I'll whiz through this. Can you do the next slide, please? So that's sort of a rough overview of what's going on in Scotland. And then just to come back to England, just to say that Living Streets is still campaigning on this. We launched a petition to mark the 3rd anniversary of the consultation closing, which was signed by just over 6,000 of our supporters. And we took it to Downing Street on the day, so that on the 22nd of November, with that sort of, is it a birthday card? I don't know, to sort of mark that anniversary. Also, just to say that Living Streets local groups are campaigning on this around the country. It's one of the main issues that we get really enthusiastic enthusiastic's probably the wrong word, but our members are very engaged on this issue. They're very concerned about it. And I think that just reflects how big an issue this is broadly. So we encourage those who might be watching, join your Living Streets local group, encourage your MP to call for a ban on pavement parking in England, or at least a consultation response. And pavement parking will form part of our 2024 campaigning to push for better conditions for children walking to school. Could you do the final slide, please? So my contact details are there if you want any more information. Just a final couple of plugs that Living Streets are currently taking part in the Big Give. So anything that you donate to the charity over the next 24 hours will be doubled. And why not join as a member if you're passionate about pavement parking? So details on our 75 local groups, which cover every corner of the country, are online on our website. So come campaign with us. Let's shout louder together. Thanks.
Thank you, Callum. Thank you for that excellent presentation and for sticking to time as well, which is great news. That was fascinating too. Our next speaker is Kate Dickens, Senior Policy Officer at Pavement. The hot seat is yours.
Thank you.
It's only so you can be seen by the camera.
Thank you. So as the chair introduced, I'm Kate Dickens. I'm a white female. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm wearing a white shirt and a mulberry suit and glasses.
Just give me 1 second. This is the right one. Is that right?
Looks good to me. Yeah, so I'm the Senior Policy Officer for Inclusion at SUSTrans, which for anyone who isn't aware, is the charity making it easier for everyone to walk, wheel and cycle. And we do this in a number of ways, through policy to path building and infrastructure. But this presentation will mainly be informed by 2 policy related projects that we undertook with the charity Transport for All, who are also represented here. So the first one is the Disabled Citizens Inquiry, which took place or concluded at the start of this year, that worked with a number of disabled people to identify barriers to walking and wheeling, and also policy solutions to overcome those barriers. And the second is a report that we've undertaken on behalf of the LGA, so called the Path to Inclusive Footways, that looks at the barriers to footway accessibility, their impact on individuals as well as local authorities, and again comes up with policy recommendations to help overcome and tackle these barriers. So following on from the summaries for on sort of transport accessibility and the wider picture of pavement parking in the UK, I'm going to focus in on other aspects of footway accessibility, particularly from the Path to Inclusive Footways reports, and how these are compounded by pavement parking. Next slide, please. So first off, I think it's worth reminding ourselves that pavement parking is itself a barrier to footway accessibility. In fact, it was one of the main barriers that came up in the Path to Inclusive Footways work that we did. 73% of disabled people would find a prohibition on pavement parking useful for them to walk or wheel more. So it's an issue that affects key groups, people who find accessibility of the footway harder generally. So this is disabled people, older people, people traveling with children. But as part of this work, so the Path to Inclusive Footways work, we looked at a range of barriers, not just pavement parking, and how it affects all people. And one of the key things that came out of this was that there's a lot of intersectionality and there's a lot of crossover in how these barriers compound each other. So rather than focusing just on pavement parking, I will move on and talk about some of these other barriers and how they also affect footway accessibility. Next slide. Oh, brilliant.
Oh, too far.
So pavement damage is a huge one. With a trend towards larger and heavier vehicles, we're seeing pavement damage increase. It's a problem for several reasons. Damaged footways are just harder to navigate and less safe to navigate. 89% of disabled people would find footways that are level and smooth helpful for them to be able to walk and wheel more. And I think we could probably say we would all find level and smooth footways helpful for walking. It's a leading barrier to walking and wheeling for disabled and older people, but it also makes them less safe, leading to a greater number of trips and falls, which can then lead to costly legal cases and social care implications for local authorities. So it does have several impacts beyond the obvious. Next slide, please. But there is still the obvious, which is, of course, the direct cost of repairing damaged footways. In the context of real terms budget cuts for highways budgets across England, and the majority of local authorities are thinking they don't have enough funding to maintain pavements to the desired standard, clearly extra damage is going to divert funds away from other potential projects, other maintenance and potential improvements. It's estimated that up to 20% of footway budgets in some council areas are spent directly on repairing damage caused by pavement parking. So the impact isn't insignificant. It also means that the threshold for damage severity goes up. So local authorities can only repair damaged footways where the damage is more severe, leading to an overall decline in the standard of footways across England, which has been noted in multiple studies and surveys over the years. Next slide, please. But it's not just highways budgets that are tight. Budgets across the board are struggling and being cut in various places. So looking at the indirect cost of damaged footways and pavement parking is also important. So if we think just about highways budgets for the moment, 53% of local authorities reported a cut or freeze in their highways budget in the 2022-2023 year before taking into account inflation. If you take into account inflation, that number rises significantly. This leads to an inability to invest in footway maintenance and improvements, which leads to inaccessible pavements and then potentially legal challenges if people suffer an injury as a result of a poorly maintained pavement, which even if settled out of court can be a very costly undertaking for a local authority to face, and potential social care costs if someone is injured and requires help following that injury. So it's something worth bearing in mind when we think about the impact of not maintaining our footways and the damage caused to them. Next slide, please. But there are yet more budget implications caused by pavement parking via traffic regulation orders, or TROs. They are at the moment the only way that councils outside of London can enforce in pavement parking. Without them, it remains a police matter. And as we all know, our police force face the same challenges of budgets and constraints as every other aspect of public services. And asking the police to deal with issues of pavement parking is perhaps not the best use of their time. Implementing a TRO, though, is expensive and time-consuming. It again diverts funds and officer time away from other projects. It's estimated that the cost of implementing one permanent TRO is £5,835. There are other estimates, but this one takes into account officer time and signage, etc. as well. TRO processes have been described as bureaucratic and ripe for reform, but even with suggested changes, most councils feel that UK government legislation would be the best approach to be able to tackle pavement parking in a meaningful way. Next slide, please. But there are issues beyond funding. So accessibility is obviously a key issue that we face when we talk about pavement parking. The ability to navigate the pavement when a car is parked on it is reduced. Government guidelines from the Manual for Streets say that a footway should be 2 meters wide to allow 2 wheelchairs to safely pass on it. However, many footways, as we're probably aware, across the UK are narrower than this for a number of often historical reasons. So narrow footways exacerbate the problem of pavement parking, meaning that any obstruction caused by a car could cause a partial or even complete blockage of the pavement. All people require space to walk or wheel on the pavement. People with mobility aids of various types require a greater width. For many aids, this is 110 centimetres as a minimum. Otherwise, they may be forced to either enter the carriageway or to turn back. The greatest impact in this area is also felt when there's street clutter, some of which may be necessary, such as utilities boxes and street lighting. But permanent clutter can be prepared for. Pavement parking by its nature is unpredictable and therefore can't be, making route planning almost impossible. Next slide, please. Which leads me neatly onto my final point, which is about accessibility mapping. Accessibility mapping can take many forms, but is usually in the form of some form of visual aid that marks dropped curbs or accessible crossing points, locations of disabled toilets, or even footway widths. The list is quite extensive. 77% of disabled people who took part in the Disabled Citizens Inquiry said they would find an app or website where disabled people can share information, experiences, and rate routes or destinations useful for them to walk or wheel more. So it's clearly useful, and there's various different types of accessibility mapping out there. However, if pavement parking occurs, it can obstruct an accessible route, which means that the power that accessible maps give to allow people to travel, to give them the confidence to travel, to enable them to travel, can be taken away. It means they can be cut off from public transport. It means they can be cut off from friends and family. It means that they may have to abandon journeys, which may lead to a loss of confidence and have a knock-on effect to their personal health and economic situation, but also to society in a wider sense. So clearly, pavement parking has a wide-reaching effect in various areas, not just the immediate ones that you see on the street. Next slide, please. So what do we want to happen next? Well, I think, as many people have mentioned, the consultation 3 years on we'd love a response to it. We think, based on the research that we've done, extending a London-style ban to the rest of England would be the best way forward. It's a cross-party issue that affects people across the country, and therefore it needs a cross-party solution. On the right of the slide, there's a picture of a Disabled Citizens Inquiry participant, Mark, and his guide dog meeting with their MP. And this is just evidence of how we need to listen to people, listen to people who are affected by pavement parking, but also local authorities, and listen to the responses from the consultation. And we would like all parties to commit to tackling pavement parking in their manifestos. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kate. Very full presentation there, very persuasive. Our final speaker, and thank you for sticking to time. Our final speaker is Hannah Truster, sitting next to me.
Shall I go first?
Yes, shall I? Well, I can move over if you want.
You go. Around the table. Oh.
Right, so I'm just going to get out of the way.
Shift along.
Yeah. You sit here.
Thank you.
I've got my jacket.
Oh, that's fine.
Right. So, Hannah, you've got 10 minutes.
Sure.
Starting now.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, everyone. I'm Hannah Truster. I am Public Affairs Policy Manager at Guide Dogs. I am also female with brown hair and glasses, which seems to be a trend today. So I'm going to quickly talk about Guide Dogs and the activities that we've been doing, and then I'll pass on to, Penny, to talk about her experiences. So if we just do next slide, please. So pretty much repeating what we've heard already today, but I think that helps to kind of justify, talk about the importance of the issue. But particularly why Guide Dogs wants a new law is, we've talked about it already, but pavement parking is dangerous for all pedestrians, including, disabled people and older people, as well as parents with children. People with sight loss are particular at risk as they may be forced out into the road, traffic that they cannot see. Our survey in 2021 showed that 4 out of 5 blind or partially sighted people said that pavement parking makes it difficult to walk on the pavement at least once a week. And pavement parking is always the top issue when we speak to people with sight loss about the barriers they face and just getting out the front door. Next slide, please. So in terms of what Guide Dogs have done so far as an organisation, we've been campaigning for the new law on pavement parking for many years now. And again, as we've all talked about today already, a clear law means that vehicles are not allowed to park on the pavement unless deemed necessary by the local authority. As is the case in London and now in Scotland, we recognise that some pavements do need to have pavement parking, but that just needs to be clear so that people are aware of where it's happening. So things that we've done to kind of gain support and gather support, we've taken our asks to party conferences, we've hosted several parliamentary events, and we've had thousands of campaigners take part in our online and offline actions. So writing to their MPs or collecting petition signatures on the street, we've managed to garner lots of support. Next slide, please. And so in terms of support, we've got organisations in the room that are all calling for the same thing. We've been speaking to a number of parent disability organisations, which is parking associations, local government associations. We're all calling for the same thing. And there was also a private members bill in 2015. So also, many MPs are showing their support for the new law. We hear from lots of MPs that talk to us about, their constituents wanting the same thing as well. So it's not, it's not just us. We also did some recent research, and councillors just literally in September 2023, it shows that 74% of councillors in England supported a national law, yet only 22% of them stated that the existing powers to tackle pavement parking are sufficient. So it just shows that it's not just charities and people calling for it as well. It's coming from government and local government as well. So obviously something needs to change. And as we've talked about, and we all want a response to the consultation is just long overdue now. And I'm going to pass you over to Penny now, who can talk about pavement parking much better than I can. So,
Penny.
and Questa, of course.
Hello, good afternoon. Yes, my name's Penny. I am pronoun her. I have to remember that. I'm quite short. I'm wearing a black jacket with a spotted blouse, and I have light hair. I'm refusing to look great. And unlike some of the others, I don't wear glasses because I have the lovely Cresta, who is a blonde Labrador Retriever cross. I would like, if it's okay, to ask you to take a journey with me. I would like you just for a minute to imagine you're with me on a Monday morning. I need to get to work. I have plenty of time to do so because I'm one of those people who likes to leave plenty of time. My husband has offered me a lift, but I have a guide dog, so I wish to be independent, but I also wish to enjoy the walk because when I get to work, I invariably feel so much better than friends and colleagues who've been in the car. I step out the front door, and initially my husband has to accompany me across the road because unfortunately there are no crossings at the roundabout that I need to go over. And then he sees me on my way, and I'm walking proudly and happily with Cresta. I'm actually on a very busy road, but it's a really quite wide pavement. It's got houses that are, should we say, fairly expensive, plenty of parking, and no reason for me to expect any problems. So I walk up the road, and then about 10 minutes in, my dog stops. Now, those who aren't aware of guide dogs and what they do, when they come across an obstacle that they can't just navigate round, they will actually indicate that by walking to the curb. This is what Cresta does, and so I know that there's something not quite right. So I ask her to try again, and we do a little turn, and she heads back towards the obstacle, but then once again goes to the curb. So I know I have a problem. But my problems aren't just the fact that I have an obstacle in the way. It's also the fact that I am next to an incredibly busy road. It's a main route into town. Cars are non-stop going up and down. And I need to find out what the obstacle is. So I have to do something which normally I wouldn't perhaps do in case it's a hole in the ground. But I investigate and discover it is, in fact, a vehicle parked right across the pavement. And even if I breathe in, I am not going to be able to get past the rather prickly hedge on the left-hand side. So the only option is to go the road. At this point, I have to make a choice. Now, I'm trying to get to work. I have a meeting at 9 o'clock. I'd left plenty of time. There is no way I can go in that road. Even if I felt able to slip slightly down the curb and feel past the car, keeping as close in as I can, I would never do it. I would never put my guide dog at risk, and I'd be mad to put myself at risk. So how am I feeling? I'm starting to feel a bit panicky because what do? You may remember that I said I'd had to have help to cross my roundabout. I can't simply just turn around and go home. I'm also worried that I'm going to be late for work. I think it's really important to be on time. And I'm angry. I'm angry that there is a vehicle stopping me from getting to work, having my beautiful walk, feeling good about myself. My confidence is going. I am a mother. I have children. I have brought my children up. I run a scout group. I go skiing. I've run the London Marathon, but I cannot get past a car on a pavement that some inconsiderate person has left. In the end, I only have one option. I have to pick up the phone. Thank goodness for mobiles, we all say. I ring my husband and I have to apologise to him, and I admit in tears that I cannot get any further, and would he please come home because he has gone to work and rescue me. It's humiliating, it's upsetting, it's so many words that I just can't come up with. So I turn around and head back towards the roundabout. My dog doesn't see why we should do this, so she's not happy. She likes to go the one way, doesn't want to return. Eventually I get back to the roundabout, and all I can do is stand and wait for my husband, who takes his time because, of course, he's got to get out of work. He has been put out, but he comes really graciously, and he walks across the roundabout, and he takes me back to the house, and we get in the car and we drive to work. But I still remember today how that felt. And that's one of many incidents. And they can really vary. I can be stuck like that, or I can find myself unable to get past a vehicle and knock on the vehicle and shout, "Is there anyone there?" Because I don't know, there could be somebody in it. And if there is, what are they going to be like? People can so often be rude. They so often say, "I'm allowed to park here. You have to go in the road around it." And one gentleman recently said, "I'll take you in the road." And it was a very busy road. And I said, "No, I'm very sorry. I will stand here as long as it takes for you to do whatever it is you're doing to move your car. But I cannot let you take me in the road with my dog." So I would just ask, please, please, pavement parking has been an issue since I was a child. I am nearing the end of my working life. That's how long it's been about. And I think that is shameful. And I know that it's something, as was said by our very first speaker, that could be resolved. So please, please help people like myself and the hundreds of others that I know of who have guide dogs and long canes and use wheelchairs, who need the ability to get about independently and with confidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Penny and Questa, and Hannah. Bang on time. I'm very grateful to you. And that was very powerful because it was first-hand experience, and that really, I think, got to all our hearts here. We've now got time for questions, 15 minutes. Unfortunately, I've got to leave for another meeting. So I don't know, Adam or Lord Hoffman, whether one of you could, or Adam will organise the questions if that's all right with you, Lord Hoffman. So I'm going to hand over to you, and I can just read out the first question here, which is not in front of me. Here we are, yes. So the first question is this: there are existing laws already able to be enforced, including obstruction and parking a vehicle over 7.5 tons on the footway. How can police and council parking attendants be pressed to enforce available and current laws? So I don't know who wants to go first on that.
Would the speakers like to come and sit down?
Yeah, if you come, I shall then.
I'm happy to. It's a very difficult one. So one of the things that came up in the Path to Inclusive Footways work that we did, we interviewed officers and members from different local authorities across the UK, across England, and we did a survey of members and again officers within local authorities in England, asking questions about this. And the problem is resource. It is very expensive to be able to send out a police officer, or even where you have TROs already in place or other enforcement options, to send someone out, because you don't necessarily get that money back. It is more expensive in a lot of local authority areas to enforce, so to send out someone to give out tickets, for example, than you regain from the tickets that you give out. So it isn't a money generating process. So I don't have a simple answer for the question. I think it's nearly impossible given current economic situations and budgets. I'm sure there are options people can take in terms of enforcing in the most affected areas, which is what a lot of council areas do. They target areas that have a major problem. But across the board, it is very difficult, particularly where we don't have those enforcement rules for civil enforcement.
It's just not a very good solution, would be the additional point there. A YouGov poll that I think similar to the research that I was citing before, showed that only 5% of drivers actually understand all of the current rules on pavement parking. So I don't know, throwing in more of these kind of case by case TRO exemptions is not just costly and inefficient. It's also, it makes it even more difficult for drivers to understand what the rules are. So just a nationwide ban that makes it the exception rather than the rule would be rule rather than whichever way around that makes sense, would be a bit more straightforward.
Okay, just a question about the increased use of micromobility and the littering of e-scooters a risk to multimodal infrastructure, as in the pavements and I guess to a certain extent cycle lanes. So would anyone like to have a go at that?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think I would agree with a lot of what Kate said from the findings of the Disabled Citizens Inquiry, that barriers to using the footway are myriad, and what we need to see is the right infrastructure in the right place, so making sure that the footway width is protected for people who are walking and wheeling, but also being aware that many disabled people do need to use our cars as a mobility aid. So I just want to make it really clear this isn't about stigmatising car users at all. And Annie's really helpfully shared her experience of where we do need to drive. And so we think that there's an opportunity for local authorities to look at how the highway is used as well. So perhaps reviewing where accessible parking bays are, making sure there's correct provision, the correct percentage of accessible parking bays, and that those are statutorily enforceable ones rather than discretionary. And I think that kind of scans across to other uses. So whether it's making sure that e-scooters or drop bikes are in the right place, so that footway is clear. Again, making remembering that many disabled people, an e-scooter could be a mobility aid or a cycle could be a mobility aid. So this isn't about posing kind of competing users of the footway or highway against each other. It's actually looking at what the barriers are. So taking the people out of the equation as being a problem or issue, actually looking at how we're designing our street space so that we're designing those problems and those barriers out.
Anyone else want to just come back on that one?
Second.
Okay. Okay. This cuts a little bit back to what Callum was saying about the survey, and only 5% of people actually understanding what the pavement parking laws are. How can we? I mean, I'm not sure it's our role, but how can we get the general public to appreciate that pavement parking is an issue? If 95% of drivers don't really understand the rules, how can campaign groups? Oh, I mean, it shouldn't be down to campaign groups, but what could be done to make sure the drivers actually understand what the rules are about pavement parking? Because it's all very well to park on the pavement, but you're not allowed to drive on the pavement. So therein lies a problem. Anyone want to kick off on that?
So, yeah, I guess let's look at what Scotland are doing at the moment in terms of their education campaign, a public awareness campaign. It's on the radio, billboards, the same as any other kind of public education or health campaign. Let's get the information out there and the impact that has. That would be my suggestion.
And it'd be interesting to compare what drivers thought about pavement parking before that campaign and before the law has been. I think it starts. Does it start 11th of December?
Yeah.
Be interesting to compare the before and after. I've seen some of the graphics and they're really good. Yeah, they're really strong.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone know what's really holding back the DfT output on this topic?
No.
Go on, Living Streets must have an inside line into DfT.
It's a good question. No, we don't, to be honest with you. That's all I've got. It's ridiculous to wait 3 years for a response to a consultation. I think there was something like 15,000 respondents, most of whom will probably, as you might have seen today, just drumming the same message home. So yeah, it shouldn't be that difficult to come up with a response over 3 years. As I said before, you could have done a lot in that time.
But you people meet with ministers and senior civil servants. So what happens when you bring up the question of pavement parking? Because it must have come up in conversation with officials and with ministers. What kind of answer do you get?
We just get told looking through we get told there are existing powers that councils can use with the TROs, and then we get told there's lots of responses. We're waiting. We've done lots of ways of trying to get an answer out of the government. You know, PQs. We've had events. We're hosting an event next week, and I'm sure we'll get the same kind of responses. So I feel that we're at a blocking point of not sure.
Yeah,
what.
we've heard a lot, a response along the lines of it's a very complex issue and a response will be forthcoming. It's always, the response is always on its way in due course, or it's always on its way shortly. I remember Jesse Norman and Richard Holden, when they were the respective ministers, they used the word shortly quite often.
Get us excited.
Yeah, shortly is, you know, distinctly vague. So yeah.
And I do recall at the Transport Select Committee, the previous Transport Secretary did say that she was particularly interested in I don't want to misquote her, but she definitely gave the hint that she wanted to do something about it in a positive way in terms. And then obviously there was a change of personnel. I don't know whether it's come up. I haven't seen it come up at Transport Select Committee again. But obviously there's been I think about 60 PQs and debates in Parliament. So there's no shortage of people trying to push for this.
I think just on the note, I'm sure you'll be aware that the Transport Committee current inquiry is into the robustness or fits for purpose of legislation to do with accessible transport. There might be an opportunity for APG to raise that in the context of that inquiry as to whether the current laws that we've been talking about today are doing enough.
Well, Fabian has just joined the Transport Select Committee, so he's replaced Ruth Cadbury, who was our previous co-chair. So maybe I'll pick that up and try and feed that in. Okay. If current arrangements force vehicles to stop or park on the carriageway, is it likely that more obstruction of through movement will occur, particularly to emergency vehicles? This would need to be enforced by police. Okay. Anyone want to talk about where the roads? Well, I guess what's that saying is that some roads aren't suitable for parking on the carriageway. I think we know the answer to that is that there's going to be some exemptions, so just like there are in London.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Was it you, Callum, who said about the 3 boroughs? Or no?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I wasn't aware that there'd been a real sort of loosening of those powers in those 3 boroughs.
Yeah, and I think pretty much I don't know of anywhere that there's a pavement parking ban where the emergency vehicles can't park on the pavement. They just are allowed to. So if that was a concern, then it shouldn't be one.
Can I come in on that one and just say that I would certainly expect there to be roads that I wouldn't go down because I know that there would be cars parked on them, and that's part of the challenge. If you've got a vision impairment, you have to learn a route. You can't suddenly cross a road if you don't know that road, and if there's no crossing, you learn that there is a road not to use and you have an alternative route. So for me and for lots of other people with sight loss, that's what we want. We want the consistency, so it allows for that pavement parking, but we know where it will take place.
Okay. Is that pretty much? We've pretty much gone through. Okay. We're kind of coming to the end of the meeting anyway. I don't know if any of you would like to make any last comments about how this might move forward. Is it just about keeping your fingers crossed?
I think, we just really want to see action. We want action that doesn't have any negative impacts on anybody, and we've all talked a lot today about exemptions and the importance of having opportunities for people to walk on wheels for those last mile journeys. And we also want to see whatever action comes out of this, not putting the onus back on to disabled people to keep those rules and regulations enforced. So just another quote I wanted to share, I didn't read out earlier. So a quote from one of our members that said, "If I need to get to a GP appointment and there's a car obstructing the pavement, it's not much help to me if the council gets back to me in 3 to 5 working days to resolve the issue. By then I've missed my appointment, missed my bus, or missed my event." So we can't be in a situation where even if the rules do change, we're still looking to the same people who are being discriminated against to keep those rules enforced. So we want a responsible consultation, and we also want a proactive approach from all those people that have the power to make a difference, to actually get out there and remove those barriers before we walk into them.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks very much, everyone. And our next meeting is on the 15th of January. It's about autonomous vehicles. Another interesting hot potato, but one that is actually being taken seriously. And more details will be available soon. Thanks very much.